Rain tapped against the old wooden porch, a steady rhythm that matched the worn heart of the old man who lived there. The townsfolk whispered as they passed his house, glancing at him with pity in their eyes. They called him cranky, a curmudgeon. But they had never really looked into his eyes, never let themselves wonder about the strength hidden beneath that frail exterior. One stormy evening, as torrents poured from leaden skies, a group of teenagers huddled together on the curb. They dared each other to knock on the old man's door, convinced he was just a harmless relic of time, a ghost waiting to fade away. "I bet he doesn't even have a phone," one of them laughed, elbowing his friend playfully. But there was something about that old house, the way it stood defiantly against the elements, that made him pause. Curiosity sparkled in those young eyes, dulled by the weight of their own frivolous pride. "Come on, dude." "He's just an old man," the biggest of the group shrugged, trying to play off his hesitation. They walked toward the porch, creaking under their weight. The old man sat inside, barely visible through the gloomy glass, unbothered by the rising wind. But the curiosity was irresistible. With fumbling hands and mischievous grins, they knocked. The sound echoed through the house, a challenge ringing clear. They expected silence, an empty void, but instead the door creaked open, revealing the old man himself. He stood there, frail but erect, with silver hair feebly framing his weathered face. He wore a long, tattered coat that told tales of countless chilly evenings spent watching life pass him by. But his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, spoke louder than any words ever could. A storm of experience lingered within them, and those young boys were suddenly confronted with something unexpected. His voice was a brittle whisper, but there was an edge to it that set the boys on guard. No longer were they laughing, now they were just intrigued. One of them, emboldened, called out, "We just thought." A moment hung heavy in the air, thick with apprehension. They were filled with the arrogance of youth, the underlying belief that they held the power to save someone. A fleeting smile crossed the old man's lips, just a twitch on the corner, but it set off an avalanche of wonder in the boys. He stepped back, beckoning them inside with a wave of his hand. "Come on in then," he said, his tone now laced with challenge. As they entered, lightning illuminated the small room like a camera flash, and they took in the clutter. Faded photographs lined the walls, each telling stories of lives intimately intertwined. There were books stacked haphazardly, each one filled with wisdom that had long since been forgotten by the world outside. There was a shatter of thunder, and the room felt electric, alive with tension. "Take a seat," he commanded, and they found themselves obeying without question. The boys exchanged glances, the bravado starting to slip. He inquired, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. No, not exactly," one of them stammered. "Liar," he replied, and the word bounced around the room. The boys fidgeted, the unassuming elderly man shattering their preconceived notions. With that, he stood straighter, the shadows flickering around him. He walked slowly toward a trunk, and they watched, their breaths held as he wrenched it open. Inside lay equipment, weathered instruments with a history attached to every scratch and dent. The boys leaned in closer, their bravado replaced with fascination. He pulled out an old wooden flute. The room fell silent, save for the storm raging outside. He raised the flute to his lips, and as he played, the air changed the melody, filling every corner, wrapping around the boys as tightly as an embrace. For a moment, they were transported. The storm became a distant memory as they soared through time with the notes flooding the room. The old man had once been a renowned musician, his concerts selling out arenas. His talent had once sparked joy, ignited passions, and created bonds, but that was before loss had dulled the edge of his spirit. He had allowed himself to be buried under years of solitude, mistaken for a ghost lingering in his own life. As he played, the room resonated with memories, the applause, the cheers, the thrill of being alive. Boys found themselves swaying, their hearts entwined with the notes, and for that fleeting moment they could see him, not as a relic of age, but as a warrior of art and soul. When the last note faded, a silence fell, heavy with awe. The old man lowered the flute, but the boys remained entranced, unable to shake the feeling that they had just witnessed something sacred. There was power in music, a power they hadn't imagined he possessed. "What?" one whispered, struggling to find the words as reality rushed back. The old man chuckled softly, the sound riddled with years of wisdom. "Everyone has a story, a strength you can't see at first glance." And then he did something that shocked them all. He challenged them to play. "Let's see what you've got." "A real jam," he said with glimmering mischief in his eyes. One by one they hesitated, then dug into their pockets, revealing forgotten instruments of their own. A guitar, a harmonica, even a set of box drums. They were young, vibrant, and filled with the arrogance of laughter and shared camaraderie. The old man's presence melted into theirs, transforming the dimly lit room into a masterpiece of collective sound. For hours, laughter crisscrossed with music until they poured themselves into the night. They discovered that the old man had once been a teacher at a prestigious music conservatory, but his heart had grown weary after family losses and fading dreams. As they played, they began to realize that hope hadn't vanished, it had merely been misplaced. As the storm raged outside, they created a symphony together, a tapestry of sound that erased any boundaries of age, perception, or expectation. The old man's power became evident, not just through music, but through the shared joy of rediscovering life. Every chord felt like a memory wrapped in laughter, and every beat pulsed with a new connection. But then, just as the night began to wane, the storm outside faded, and so did their musical journey. With one last flourish, they felt the old man's presence shift, the weight of sadness creeping back in. As he sat quietly, watching the boys gather their things, they sensed something deep in their hearts, an uncomfortable truth that sparked a fire of determination. He replied, feigning grumpiness but failing to hide the warmth behind his eyes. "Because you're not just an old man," another added, "you're a legend." In that moment, they didn't just see the old man, they felt him. He had shared his world, opened up his heart, and what they had once dismissed as frailty transformed into dignity and pride. Days turned into weeks, and the boys returned. They created a vibrant bond, their summer nights filled with laughter and tunes, breaking through the solitude that had engulfed the old man for so long. They learned, inspired by his tales and talent, coaxing him back into life, breathing color into the faded corners of his memory. One sunny afternoon, driven by newfound purpose, the old man found himself on the town square with the boys. They set up a performance, a small stage adorned with hastily made banners and colorful flowers, their hearts beating in sync. Whispers of the concert spread through the town, curiosity piqued. The stage was set, the crowd gathered, and as the boys launched into their music, the old man stepped forward, flute in hand. At first, a few familiar faces mingled with confusion, but as he played, the spellbinding notes twisted and twirled, carrying the audience along with them. A hushed silence consumed the crowd, one that turned into roaring applause when the last note floated into the air. And as the cheers rose, the old man found himself standing tall, not as a relic of time, but as a force of nature, an artist rediscovered, his spirit soaring higher than the clouds that once seemed so heavy. The boys had helped him reclaim his identity, reminding him that power doesn't fade, it transforms, waiting patiently for someone to notice it. In the stormy moments, they had all gathered their strength, weaving their stories together. Age and youth had danced in harmony, creating a melody that broke barriers and dispelled judgments. As the crowd erupted into cheers, something shifted in the hearts of the boys too. They realized it was never just about feeling powerful. It was about understanding the power and beauty hidden in the most unexpected places, waiting to be unearthed. Sometimes, when an age-old tale flickers in the shadows, it's only waiting for an open heart to pull it into the light. In that small town, they found that the old man was not simply a figure marked by time. He was a testament to resilience, a reminder that true power lies not just in the strength of youth, but in the wisdom of experience, waiting patiently to ignite when given the chance. The sharp crack of thunder echoed through the small town as rain poured down like a curtain, blanketing the streets. Most people hurried indoors, seeking refuge from the tempest. But there in the heart of the storm stood an old man with silver hair and a weathered face, unfazed by the fury of the sky above him. He was at the edge of his yard, digging into the damp earth as if the universe itself were calling to him. Yet to the rest of the town, he was just a frail figure, an elderly man living alone in the crumbling farmhouse that seemed to lean against the wind. The townsfolk whispered about him in dark corners of cafes, in libraries, and even on playgrounds. He was the subject of gossip, a crazy old coot, they'd say, someone who had surrendered to the shadows of time, abandoned by the world around him. Empty window panes reflected the shadows of those judgments. Eyes filled with pity brushed against him every day, but no one dared to approach. They thought he was helpless, that he had lost the vigor of his youth and the spark of his soul, a mere ghost wandering through life. But one stormy evening, everything changed. Out of nowhere, a small dog, brown and bedraggled, darted out into the street, chasing a leaf dancing in the wind. His owner, a little girl, screamed as the dog sprinted into the rain, unaware of the approaching car. The driver, honking desperately, fought to stop in time, but the brakes squealed in vain against the rain-slicked pavement. In that moment, it seemed as if time itself slowed. Everyone around froze, eyes wide with terror. Suddenly, a blur of movement flashed before their horrified eyes. Old Man Johnson, unable to bear the impending disaster, launched himself forward, his frail body rushing into the road. He reached the dog just in time, scooping it up and rolling to the side as the car sped past, narrowly missing both him and the small creature. There were gasps, disbelief, and then the sound of rain, almost deafening, filling the gaps left by quiet shock. The townsfolk stood still, frozen in disbelief. Had they underestimated this old man all along? With shaking hands, he placed the trembling dog on the ground, brushing the rain from its fur. He looked up, his blue eyes blazing with a storm of emotions, determination, fire, and a flicker of something daring. The little girl, her face streaked with tears, rushed forward. "Thank you," she cried, wrapping her arms around the old man's neck. And for a moment the world turned, and those eyes once filled with pity now shimmered with newfound respect. "Be careful," he whispered, a softness in his tone that surprised everyone. He had shown not just bravery, but kindness, a depth that echoed beyond his age. The crowd began to stir, mirroring the disbelief raging in their own hearts. Many had strolled past him, brushing aside the idea that he could be anything more than a curmudgeonly specter. Yet here he was, revealing a strength that shattered the glass they had placed around him, and suddenly the whispers began to change. They no longer called him helpless, now he was a hero. But it wasn't just about the rescue that night, no, it was deeper. After that moment, curiosity took root. People began visiting the old man first in droves, then gradually, as the novelty wore off, individuals. They sat with him on the porch, listening to stories of a time when music danced in the air, when laughter was abundant, and when he had embraced life with open arms. They dug into his past with questions that pulled them into his world. What they uncovered was far richer than they expected. There was a glimmer of a musician who once filled grand theaters with melodies that could melt hearts. People didn't think about the nights he spent on stage, the encore applause ringing in his ears, or the loss that eventually shadowed his life. With every tale, they painted a picture of him not as fragile but as resilient, an artist who had survived heartache and sorrow, yet still dreamed. As time drifted on, he welcomed them into his universe, teaching them how to play instruments he had once wielded with passion. They became his students. Laughter filled the old farmhouse, the sound of music replacing years of silence. The townsfolk were stunned by his emergence from behind the wall they had built around him. Each lesson echoed with strength, teaching not just notes and rhythms but resilience and courage. Then came another stormy night, reminiscent of the first. The town sat anxiously under gray clouds, whispering of the rain and the past heroism. But this night they would witness something even greater. The old man called for everyone to gather at the town square, a place once shrouded in shadows. With lanterns swaying gently in the wind, they formed a semicircle, and there stood Old Man Johnson at the center, a band of eager young faces flanking him. The excitement was palpable, charged with the thrill of the unknown. He leaned heavily on his old guitar, worn with age but full of heart. And as they played, the clouds began to crackle with electricity. The first notes pierced through the darkness, rising into the storm above. Rains fell, but the sound of music transformed the square. It became a tapestry of sound, weaving through the rain-soaked air. People filtered in, curiosity pulling them toward the enchantment brewing at the heart of their town. There was laughter, clapping, and singing symbols of connection echoing beneath the storm. The music enveloped them like a warm hug, an awakening of something they thought had been lost forever. It stirred emotions buried deeply in the hearts of the townsfolk, tapping into memories of their youth and dreams that had faded in the hustle of adult life. In that moment, Old Man Johnson was no longer just an old man. He was their guide into a rediscovered joy, a spark igniting fireflies of hope in every heart. As the final note trembled into the air, a hush wrapped around them, a collective deep breath shared. They looked at one another, the realization dawning. True power resided not only in the individual but in the gathering, in the shared bonds of love, music, and community. He had shown them it wasn't age that defined strength, but spirit and connection. It didn't take muscle to lift hearts, but passion, vulnerability, and the courage to share your story. But then there was another still night a few weeks later when the whispers returned. Only this time they spoke not of pity, but of gratitude and admiration. Old Man Johnson had fallen ill, and the town swirled in concern. They who once thought him helpless now stood at his doorstep, ready to repay the kindness he had shown them. They brought meals, laughter, and warmth. Even in his weakened state, his spirit shone. He would gather neighbors and families around, sharing tales of his youth, still painting pictures with words. He would teach them small lessons, even with the shuffle of old age weighing him down. Life is a song, he would whisper. In the depths of his illness, he discovered another kind of power, the power of community and being cared for. Those who once gazed at him with pity transformed into a tapestry of love surrounding him, filling his home with warmth. They were no longer just townsfolk. They were family, acknowledging his worth and all he had given them. Time passed and the seasons changed, yet the bond forged in the storm lingered. The townsfolk rallied around him, celebrating small victories, finding moments of joy in the hardest of times. That summer marked a renaissance for them, a time of rediscovery where even the youngest learned the value of connection. Then came the fateful message. Old Man Johnson had left the world, but he did so with a smile, surrounded by the very voices he had once breathed life into. The town felt a collective ache, but also something profound: gratitude. They realized becoming part of his story was transformative. No longer were there whispers of helplessness. Instead, they celebrated his legacy. With music spilling into the streets and laughter echoing in the town square, they honored him. They created a community festival, one anchored in the joy of life he had reignited in them. Everything he taught became the fabric of their gatherings. As they strummed guitars and clapped hands, they felt his presence, a reminder that strength can bloom even in the unlikeliest of places. Age was not a limitation, but a testament to survival, growth, and the teachings we pass down. His life became a spark, igniting the power of connection that could never fade. So there it was, the old man once scorned, shrouded in loneliness, transformed into the embodiment of community and resilience. From helplessness to a legacy, he wove a tapestry that would resonate through generations. Amidst thunder and rain, lessons of courage roared back to life. reminding everyone that the greatest strength often resides right beneath the surface, waiting patiently to be uncovered. And sometimes it takes the most unexpected person to show us how to rise. Rain poured down like a curtain, drenching the world outside. On the edge of a quiet neighborhood, an old man stood in the middle of his crumbling yard, his thin figure huddled against the storm. Most people would have turned away, but he remained, his fingers working the soil with stubborn determination. To the onlookers, he was just Old Man Thompson, a washed-up relic of a forgotten past, seemingly helpless and alone. They whispered as they passed, their voices thick with pity, assuming he was just a forgotten shadow of what once was. But that day, something unexpected happened. A family of squirrels scampered across the road, their movements quick and nervous as they darted for a sheltering tree. In their haste, one little squirrel lost its footing, tumbling into the path of an approaching car. The driver had no time to react. Gasps echoed from the onlookers, horror etched on their faces as the vehicle bore down on the innocent creature. Just then, without a single thought for himself or his own limitations, Old Man Thompson sprang into action. With surprising speed, he dashed across the street, arms outstretched, a living beacon of courage amid the chaos. He scooped up the frightened squirrel just in time, rolling to the side as the car whizzed past. The townsfolk were stunned into silence, their mouths agape. Had they underestimated him all along? He murmured, cradling the tiny creature close to his chest as it quivered. The crowd began to murmur, voices shifting from mockery to admiration. They saw something different in Old Man Thompson that day, the flicker of bravery, the kind that doesn't care for age or frailty. After the commotion, he set the squirrel down, watching as it dashed back toward the safety of the trees. The breathless crowd erupted into spontaneous applause, disbelief transforming into respect. No longer just the village curmudgeon, he was now a hero in their eyes. But this moment was only the beginning. As news spread, something shifted in the air. People began to wonder about him, to question their long-held assumptions. Who was this man who had seemingly come out of nowhere to save a life? They started flocking to his home, a curious mix of the skeptical and inspired, and before long, the old man found himself surrounded by children wanting to hear tales of his youth, by adults eager for lessons buried deep in those silvery locks. He welcomed them all, surprising even himself with how much he had to give. Stories poured forth like the rain that night, stories of his adventures as a young man full of dreams, of a time when his laughter rang through the halls of music festivals, when he danced among friends. As days turned to weeks, he shared his wisdom about life, love, and the relentless pursuit of passion. One sunny afternoon, as the children gathered on the porch of his old house, he retrieved an ancient guitar from the shadows. It was worn and battered, but it held a spirit that resonated with every string. The children's eyes widened in awe. With a smile, he began to play, fingers dancing across the fretboard as music flowed from him like water from a spring. The notes filled the air, lifting hearts, pulling smiles from their faces, turning the mundane afternoon into something magical. As he played, the children swayed and clapped, forgetting the rain-soaked streets of the past. In that moment, they were woven together, the old and the young, sharing a bond that transcended age. They began to see him for who he really was, not just an old man, but a vessel of stories and power. But the most extraordinary change came when the town decided to throw a summer festival, a celebration that had not happened in years. And who would lead the festivities? Old Man Thompson, of course. The townsfolk rallied around him, sharing ideas, and before long, they were knee-deep in preparations. They transformed the square into a vibrant spectacle, complete with lights that shimmered like stars in the dusk and laughter that echoed against the buildings, rising high into the night sky. Decked in colorful banners, the square became a heart beating for joy. Finally, the day arrived, drenched in sunlight, filled with the promise of magic. The festival commenced, and the old man stepped onto the makeshift stage with the confidence of a warrior. The audience cheered, their hearts swelling with pride and affection for the man they once overlooked. Children danced and adults clapped, lost in the excitement of the moment. As he began to play, folks joined in, the melodies dancing through the air like fireflies at dusk. His music wasn't just sound, it was a legacy, a lifeline that connected everyone through shared joy. The feeling of unity flooded the square, reverberating from the grounding notes of his guitar to the laughter that soared above. But then in the middle of the celebration, dark clouds rolled in, ominous and heavy. The wind howled and thunder rumbled, threatening to wash away the joy they had built. Panic rippled through the crowd, people darting for cover, their voices rising in confusion. But not Old Man Thompson. Though age bore down on him, he stood firm, guitar in hand, challenging the storm with every fiber of his being. He called to them, voice steady. For a second, fear gripped the crowd. But then something shifted. They looked at him, not as the old man they once dismissed, but as a titan of resilience. With hearts pounding, they returned to the square, drawn by the music that called them back from the edge of despair. And Old Man Thompson poured everything into his performance. Rain began to fall, but he played harder, his spirit igniting the crowd around him. Together, they sang loud enough to fill the skies, drowning out the thunder, laughter mingling with raindrops. They transformed the storm into a celebration, uniting against the dark clouds that threatened to divide them. In that moment, the power of community united them like never before. Tumultuous energy radiated through the square as people danced, embraced one another, and bolstered each other's spirits. They created a wall of joy against the storm, a defiance that resonated through every heart and matched every lightning strike. The festival did not just survive the storm, it thrived. People looked at one another with newfound respect, no longer merely neighbors but a collective heartbeat. And at the center of it all was Old Man Thompson, his laughter soaring higher than the downpour, the vessel of the strength they never knew he possessed. Days turned to weeks, and another season was upon them. But this time, they were filled with anticipation. The festival had become a cherished tradition, a beacon of community spirit and resilience. And Old Man Thompson, the once belittled figure, had become an integral part of their lives, a teacher, a friend, a beloved figure who had uncovered their own potential in the process. People would visit him often, bringing pies or flowers, sitting with him on the porch to share their lives, their dreams. He taught them how to embrace the passions they had long set aside, to chase the dreams that whispered beneath the surface, waiting for the courage to surface. One evening, a young woman named Clara sat across from him, her heart heavy with doubts. "I don't know if I can do what I love," she asked, her voice trembling. The old man smiled gently, his eyes twinkling. "Failure is not the end, it's just a step along the way." He leaned forward, his voice low but firm. As he spoke, Clara felt the spark of inspiration rekindle inside her. She took those words to heart. Time passed, and the seasons changed again, painting the world in new colors. Old Man Thompson became a fountain of wisdom, teaching those around him that our true power often lies in sharing experiences, dreams, and passions with one another. Each lesson ignited a fire in the souls of the townsfolk, who began to pursue their own passions with renewed vigor. Years later, a new generation emerged, and they too sought him out, eager to learn, to connect, to embrace a legacy of resilience. The once timid children now stood confidently as artists, musicians, and creators, helped along their journeys by the lessons passed down from the old man who had courageously challenged the world around him. But then came a bittersweet realization. Old Man Thompson was slowing down, the years bearing down upon him. The townsfolk gathered around him during those final days, holding fast their gratitude in unspoken words. They understood that he was a fleeting moment in their lives, a spark of power that had ignited a fire they wished never to extinguish. On a gentle autumn day, surrounded by those who loved him, he shared his last story. The room was filled with warmth, laughter, and tears, an intertwining of emotions that painted a beautiful farewell. "Remember," he said, voice soft but steady, "true power is not measured by age or appearance. It's in the ability to reach out, inspire, and connect." And with that, Old Man Thompson closed his eyes for the last time, a peaceful smile resting on his lips. The townsfolk felt a deep ache for their lost friend, but his spirit lingered in the corners of their hearts, a reminder that he had transformed their lives, teaching them that they too held the power to rise, to embrace dreams, and to forge connections that defied the storms. In memory of Old Man Thompson, the town held a festival every year, a celebration of unity, courage, and resilience. It was a time for families to gather, to share love, laughter, and stories from their own lives, weaving together memories in honor of the old man who had taught them the importance of strength and passion. As the music swelled, they felt his spirit dancing among them, reminding them that he had shown them all what lay beneath the surface was a power that could change the world. They learned that anyone can become a hero in their own right, igniting the flames of life and connection in the hearts of those around them. And thus, Old Man Thompson, once thought helpless, left behind a legacy of power that would reverberate through generations, echoing in the hearts of all who dared to dream. The storm raged outside, relentless sheets of rain hammering against the windows of the old house at the end of Oak Street. Inside, the flickering light of a worn lamp cast shadows that danced along faded wallpaper. Among the shadows sat Malcolm, an old man whose hands trembled slightly as he cupped a steaming mug of tea. To the townsfolk, he was just a forgotten relic, a figure dismissed as weak and helpless. Each day, they passed by his home, whispering their judgments beneath the press of their own lives. Malcolm had seen better days, but through those tired eyes lay a world rich with stories, lessons, and unyielding strength. And yet few cared enough to look beyond the surface. They saw the hunched back and gray hair and concluded there was nothing left, nothing but an old man waiting quietly for the end. But then, one fateful day, everything changed. It was late afternoon when a sudden commotion erupted outside. A young boy, barely 10, was playing tag with his friends near the street when a ball rolled into the road. With reckless abandon, the child darted into the space between parked cars, chasing the bouncing globe. The sun had just peeked through the clouds, casting a golden hue across the pavement, but happiness quickly morphed into horror as a car sped around the corner too quickly. The driver slammed the brakes, but it was too late. Gasps erupted from the gathered onlookers as the boy's friends screamed, frozen in pure terror. Time seemed to stretch. The boy was unaware of the impending danger, eyes locked on the ball. Malcolm's heart raced as he shot up from his chair, the mug clattering to the floor, tea seeping into the carpet. Without a second thought, he pushed through the front door, feeling the water soak his shoes, determination igniting something deep inside him. He sprinted with surprising speed for an old man, calling out to the boy just as he reached the center of the street. He roared, voice strong and authoritative, cutting through the chaos like a knife. The boy turned, confusion darting across his innocent face. In that instant, Malcolm leaped forward, grabbing the boy and pulling him to safety just as the car blared its horn, whizzing past them both. A hush fell over the crowd. Everyone stood wide-eyed, disbelief washing over them. Malcolm was breathing heavily, his heart pounding not just from exertion but from the adrenaline surging through his veins. The boy, still trembling in his grasp, looked up with wide eyes, awareness dawning on him. Malcolm asked, his voice softening as he crouched to meet the boy's gaze. The child nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. "Thank you." And then, like the breaking of an invisible dam, applause erupted. Startled, Malcolm rose to his feet, the boy now nestled safely against his side. It took a moment for him to comprehend the townsfolk who had once ignored him were now recognizing his courage. They clapped, cheers mixing with the sound of rain, transforming the dread of the moment into an unexpected celebration. Someone yelled. A wave of warmth washed over Malcolm. In that split second, he realized the power of life, of connection, and the hidden depths of his own heart. Yet once the excitement faded, he saw the wide range of expressions around him. Some still looked at him with pity, questioning how someone so old could still act so heroically. Others filled with newfound respect, their perceptions shifting like the very clouds overhead. Days went on, but the unexpected incident lingered in everyone's minds. The once fearful whispers began to morph into curious conversations. People started walking by his home, pausing to catch a glimpse of the man who had become a living lesson in bravery. They'd leave small gifts, food, flowers on his porch, tokens of appreciation that shifted the narrative surrounding him. Before long, children began to gather at his doorstep, drawn by the stories he had begun to share. They were warriors and adventurers built from heroic acts, woven from his many years of living. The little boy he had saved, Jason, was often among them, his wide eyes soaking up every word. Jason would plead, bouncing on his feet with exuberance. With each tale spun under the warm sunlight, Malcolm found himself pulled back into his younger days filled with laughter, love, and a sense of purpose. He shared stories of traveling far and wide, of music that played in his heart, of lessons learned from undeniable struggles. But the true transformation began one evening when Malcolm pulled a dusty old acoustic guitar from the depths of his attic, showing it to the children who looked on with awe. The sight of that guitar ignited something in him. With shaky fingers, he began to pluck a gentle tune, a melody rich with the weight of memories. The children were mesmerized, leaning closer to catch every note. They had never seen this side of Malcolm, a man who held the power of music within him, a piece of his soul that had long lain dormant. They begged, their excitement infectious. Malcolm chuckled softly. As the days turned into weeks, the children gathered more frequently, eager to learn and develop their own skills. With every lesson, Malcolm found not only joy but purpose. He could see the change unfolding in their eyes, sensing how they grew in confidence. The neighborhood transformed as well. What was once just a sleepy street became a bustle of creativity and laughter. People began to connect again, storytelling and music weaving bonds that had dimmed over time. From his porch, Malcolm watched as the transformations rippled outward, witnessing neighbors exchanging smiles and sharing their own stories. And then came the fateful day when a huge celebration was planned in the town, a festival that had not happened in years, a day to unite the community in joy and remembrance. There were whispers about who would lead the festivities, and soon it became clear. Malcolm was to be the heart of the event. On the morning of the festival, the sun rose in an expanse of warmth and light. Excitement filled the air, fluttering like butterflies as townsfolk prepared for the day ahead. Standing in front of the buzzing crowd, with his guitar slung over his shoulder and determination lighting up his face, Malcolm felt the weight of expectations, but also a surge of pride. As he stepped onto the stage, he could see familiar faces, the children who had grown into performers, the neighbors who now stood arm in arm, celebrating the spirit of community he had reignited. This was not just a show, this was their moment, reflecting their bravery, resilience, and love. With the first strum of his guitar, delicate and flowing like a gentle stream, the crowd fell silent. He began to play a melody that encapsulated everything, the struggles and triumphs, the laughter and sorrow. Slowly, the audience began to join in, their voices blending into a chorus of hope. As the festival unfolded, something magical transpired. People who were once strangers began to dance alongside one another, laughter echoing through the trees. They let go of their past, filling the moment with connection and understanding. Malcolm saw it all, the power of community unfolding before him, the warmth of love blossoming from shared experiences. But as night began to fall, bringing an encasing darkness over the square, a sense of unease creeped in. Dark clouds started to gather in the distance, thunder rolling ominously. Seemingly out of nowhere, just as the festivities reached their height, rain began to fall, at first a sprinkle, then a heavy downpour. The crowd began to panic, fear eroding the joyful atmosphere. But at that moment, Malcolm stood firmly with his guitar, unyielding like the roots of an ancient tree pushing down into the earth. He lifted his voice, calling out to the crowd above the sounds of thunder and rain. "We will not let this storm take our joy." His call reached deep into the hearts of those around him. Slowly, at first, the crowd began to sing a melody forged from strength, rising defiantly against the heavy rain. As the downpour intensified, something incredible happened. People began to dance. Joy radiated from their movements, laughter breaking through the shadows of worry. Malcolm played harder, his fingers flying across the strings, igniting a fervor that pushed back against nature's fury. Together, they created a tidal wave of energy, transforming the storm into a celebration of resilience. The rain no longer felt like a curse. It became a part of their story, a testament to their unity, their power. They danced in the downpour, unafraid of the storm. And in that moment, Malcolm was more than just a man. He was a symbol, a source of strength that echoed in the hearts of everyone present. When the festival finally came to an end and the clouds began to dissipate, the townsfolk remained close, brimming with warmth and gratitude. They no longer saw Malcolm as just an old man. He was their friend, their inspiration, a man transformed by the power of community he had helped cultivate. In the months that followed, Malcolm shared more stories, more music, and more lessons. He mentored young artists, fostered creativity, and encouraged a renewed sense of passion and purpose throughout the town. His humble abode became a sanctuary, a place where ideas flourished and connections deepened. As time went on, Malcolm's health began to decline. The strong figure everyone had come to admire showed signs of wear, and while the days faded like soft colors in a painting, his spirit remained as vibrant as ever. The townsfolk gathered around him, their hearts intertwined with his, ready to give back the love he had shown them. One soft evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Malcolm took a deep breath, surrounded by the warmth of those who loved him. It was as if he could feel their hearts culminating in a powerful embrace of completion in the life he had built. "Remember," he spoke slowly, his voice a gentle breeze, "the songs we share are never lost, they live in you." With that, he closed his eyes, surrendering to the call of peace. The townsfolk cried, mourning the loss of a great soul, yet each tear was matched with gratitude. They gained something profound from the old man, the knowledge that when they looked within, they could also find that same strength. In the years that followed, the town continued to flourish. They held annual festivals, celebrating not just Malcolm, but everything he represented: resilience, courage, and the extraordinary power of community. They strummed guitars and sang, echoing the very lessons he had imparted. The stories became legends, intertwined with the roots of the town itself. And in every note played, every laugh shared, Malcolm's spirit lived on a beacon shining brightly, reminding everyone that true power rests not in age or stature, but in the strength of connection, the willingness to rise, and the courage to embrace the beauty of life. What began with a storm had transformed into a legacy, one that would be cherished and passed down for generations. A testament to the old man who was once brushed aside as helpless, but showed them all how to find their own power and rise together. Wind howled through the empty streets, whipping leaves into a swirling dance of chaos. Rain lashes against the old brick buildings, soaking the pavement and pooling in the cracks. Most people hurried through, heads down and faces turned away from the storm. But there, at the edge of town, stood a solitary figure beneath a battered awning, a frail old man named Harold. To the bustling townsfolk, he was just another broken-down relic of the past. Some would question as they brushed past him, barely sparing a glance. They thought his soft-spoken words and slow movements spoke of weakness, a life filled with decay. They didn't know, they didn't see. But one stormy afternoon, like the one they were presently enduring, everything changed. It began with a violent gust of wind that ripped through the square, sending shopping bags flying. Children laughed and squealed, trying to catch the wayward objects. Suddenly, there was a commotion at the other end. A child stood frozen, eyes wide, staring as a runaway soccer ball rolled into the street. Before Harold could even take a breath, the boy darted into the road after it. In an instant, panic seized the crowd. Time slowed as an approaching car sped around the corner. The driver couldn't see the boy, his eyes locked ahead, the horn blaring but coming too late. The townsfolk stood frozen, some gasping, others shouting warnings that never reached the child's ears. From his vantage point, Harold felt a surge of adrenaline like he hadn't felt in years. Without even thinking, he surged forward, propelled by an instinctive need to protect. His frail body moved with surprising speed, fueled by the adrenaline racing through his veins. He reached the boy just in time, grabbing him by the arm and pulling him back as the car screeched past, narrowly missing them both. A gasp rippled through the crowd, their eyes wide with disbelief. The boy looked up, astonishment morphing into tearful gratitude. Harold knelt beside him. He said, the warmth in his voice a stark contrast to the icy grip of fear that clung to them a moment ago. As the boy nodded, still shaking, the townsfolk began to react. First, hesitant applause broke the silence, then grew into a full round of cheers echoing through the square. Harold felt the warmth of their claps on his back, the energy of their excitement wrapping around him like a blanket. In the days that followed, whispers around town shifted. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a moment that shattered their preconceived notions of the old man they had long dismissed. They began to see him differently, not as a helpless figure, but as someone with the heart and courage of a lion. People started approaching him, curious about the man they had overlooked for so long. They asked him about his life, eager to uncover the stories behind the weathered face. They discovered he had once been a firefighter, a hero in his own right, saving lives long before gray hair peppered his head. The children clamored, eyes sparkling with excitement, asked a little girl, wide-eyed and captivated by his tales. Harold chuckled, his smile lighting up his face. Oh yes, but it wasn't just bravery. As he spoke, he began to weave wisdom into his stories. The lessons he had learned over the years flowed from him like a river, shaping young minds with strong values. They began to understand that power didn't just lie in physical strength, but in courage, compassion, and the willingness to stand up when it mattered most. One day, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, the town organized a community picnic. Harold was invited, an event they dubbed Harold Day, honoring the man who had saved a child and forever changed their perceptions. Excitement buzzed in the air as families laid out blankets, laughter mingling with the smell of grilled burgers and freshly baked pies. Harold strolled through the throngs of people, a beaming smile gracing his face. Children ran up to him, eager to share their stories about how they had knitted scarves for the winter or volunteered at the local shelter. Harold listened, his heart swelling with pride for the next generation. They had learned to be compassionate because they had seen it in him, a transformation sowed through the seeds he had planted in their hearts. As the sun sank lower, lighting the sky ablaze with color, Harold stood before the crowd, flush with warmth and adoration. "You all remind me of the flame of humanity," he said, his voice strong and unwavering. "We shine brightest when we come together, when we support one another, when we rise." The crowd erupted into applause, energy pulsing through those gathered. They rallied together, cheering for the man who had brought them closer, who had ignited something deep within each of them. But as summer waned, Harold began to notice he was slowing down. The warmth that once radiated from his spirit seemed to flicker, and he found himself short of breath after playing with the children or recounting stories. Initially, he brushed it off, thinking it was merely a sign of aging. But soon, simple tasks felt monumental. The townsfolk were ever watchful, growing concerned for the man who had given them so much. One evening, while they gathered for a town meeting, whispers filled the air. One voice proposed. A plan began to take shape. They rallied together, determined to forge an initiative that would not only honor Harold, but also show him that the power he had given them continued to thrive. As ideas flowed, the project transformed into a community center, a place that would embody all the values he had instilled in them. Days turned into weeks as they painted walls, cleared spaces, and crafted plans for the future. A campaign was born, one that honored Harold's contributions while ensuring that the lessons he imparted would flourish long after he was gone. Finally, the day arrived when they would reveal the community center. A grand opening ceremony drew everyone from the town, bustling with excitement. Harold arrived, still appearing weary but with a spirit that shined brightly. As he stepped inside, surprise washed over him. The walls were adorned with artwork created by the children, their hope, their dreams transformed into colors and shapes. A mural painted with vibrant hues told the story of strength, resilience, and unity. Tears pooled in Harold's eyes, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "This," he asked, voice cracking slightly. "For you and for everyone in this town," a voice rang out from the crowd. "You've inspired us to be better, to be kinder." As the ceremony continued, people took turns sharing stories about how Harold had influenced their lives. From children who learned to play instruments to adults who found new courage in their paths, each testimony echoed the values he had instilled. But as laughter filled the air and cheers erupted around him, Harold felt an overwhelming heaviness in his chest. That night he returned home, feeling a surge of warmth for his community, but also a sense that his time was limited. Days passed, and Harold continued to watch over the center, encouraging everyone, mentoring them as best he could. But shadows began to creep around him, a tiredness that clung to his every move. One late afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows that stretched across his living room, the doorbell rang. It was Jason, the young boy he had saved that stormy day. "Harold, I wanted to see you," the boy beamed. "Come in, young man," Harold said, motioning him inside. Jason hesitated, then spoke, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. "I want to thank you for everything. You've taught me so much. I love coming to the community center." "I've done my job well," Harold chuckled softly, but his heart felt heavy, knowing he wouldn't always be there to see them flourish. Jason looked serious now. "But what about you? What do you need, Harold?" The old man smiled, but a sadness tugged at his heart. "You all already have, my boy. Supporting one another is what matters most. I may not have much time left, but knowing that I've ignited your passion." Those words settled between them, a moment stretched with bittersweet understanding. As night fell, Harold lay in bed, staring at the ceiling above. He closed his eyes, recalling the faces of those who meant so much to him, the laughter, the tears, the unity that swelled in his chest. A deep ache filled him, a longing to be a part of it all forever. Days blended into one another, and news of Harold's decline spread like wildfire. The community rallied in support, visiting him and sharing tales and memories, filling the room with laughter as they celebrated the life he had touched. But it wasn't enough to mask the truth. Finally, on a chilly morning, as the sun peeked through the clouds, Harold took his last breath, surrounded by those who adored him. The town grieved, sorrow rippling through them like a cold wave. They lost not just a man, but the very essence of the community spirit he had ignited. Yet in the days that followed, inspiration took root. They came together, recognizing that his spirit didn't just disappear. It had become woven into the fabric of the community they had built. They established an annual Harold Day, a celebration of unity and connection, where they would tell stories, share knowledge, and always support one another. And so every year they came together to celebrate the power that Harold had ignited in them, the strength to rise, to embrace compassion, and the courage to build a future that honored every lesson he had instilled. As children grew and families flourished, the old man's spirit shone bright in every corner of the community center, in every note sung, in every dream pursued. In the end, Harold wasn't just an old man who had once been dismissed as helpless. He became a beacon of light, a reminder that the true measure of power lies not in mere strength or age, but in the ability to connect hearts, to support one another, and to shine when the storms of life roar. They thought he was helpless, but he showed them all a strength that would echo through generations, a legacy richer than anyone could have ever imagined. The rain battered down, relentless in its fury, transforming quiet streets into rushing rivers. On the edge of a small town, in a rundown house wrapped in shadows, sat an old man named Leo. He leaned heavily on his worn cane, a frown etched deep into his weathered face. To the townsfolk, he was just old Leo, the retired mechanic who seemed to have lost his spark along with his years. They whispered about him, noting his frailty, his disheveled appearance, and how he preferred solitude over the company of others. But hidden within that fragile facade lay a story waiting to unfold, a power that remained unnoticed and untapped. It was a day like any other when fate intervened. The sky darkened ominously and thunder rumbled in the distance. Parents hurried their children inside, seeking refuge from the impending storm. Once again, the old man settled into his threadbare armchair, the familiar creaks of the house wrapping around him like an old friend. Then a loud bang resonated outside, followed by a piercing scream that shattered the stillness. Leo shot up from his chair, peering through the rain-streaked window. His heart raced as he saw a car skidding out of control, veering toward a group of children playing near the curb. Time stretched like taffy as he watched, horrified as one child, Danny, a small boy with dark curls, lost his footing, teetering dangerously close to the vehicle's path. Without a second thought, Leo flung open the door and dashed into the storm, adrenaline coursing through him. The townsfolk who had dismissed him as helpless now gawked, their mouths agape at the sight of the old man moving with an urgency they hadn't expected. The rain splashed against him, but he barely felt it. Determination consumed him. In one swift motion, Leo lunged, wrapping his arms around Danny just as the car barreled past. He pulled the boy out of harm's way, rolling to the ground and shielding him with his body. The screech of tires, the fear, and the pain of the moment echoed in Leo's ears as they hit the pavement, the weight of the world crashing down. The car screeched to a halt mere inches away. Breathless, the onlookers rushed forward, eyes wide, disbelief rippling through the crowd. Someone shouted, rushing to help him up. Danny scrambled to his feet, tears streaming down his face, and threw his arms around Leo. Thank you. In that instant, the air shifted. The old man, struggling to rise, looked into the eyes of a child who had just been given a second chance at life. The crowd, once skeptical, was transformed. They applauded, their cheers rising above the rain, as if the storm itself had taken a backseat to the bravery standing before them. Leo, breathing heavily, caught sight of their faces, every gasp, every cheer striking a chord within him. No longer just the forgotten man on the outskirts of town, he had become a hero in a moment of desperation. Days turned into weeks, and the incident began to swirl through the town like autumn leaves caught in the wind. The narrative around old Leo transformed. People who had only ever glanced at him with pity now sought him out, gathering on his porch, eager to listen to his stories. Tell us what it was like, Leo, they asked, their eyes shining with curiosity. The children returned too, flocking to his front yard like moths to a flame. Leo welcomed them, inviting them into his world. They would sit on his porch, listening intently as he recounted tales from his youth, stories of great adventures, wild ideas, and the lessons he had learned from a life well lived. Strength isn't just about muscles, kids, he would tell them, his voice steady and warm. As the town began to embrace him, Leo felt something awakening within himself. Perhaps he wasn't as helpless as they had once believed. Each visit energized him, fostering a bond that rekindled his spirit. One crisp autumn day, while the leaves fluttered down like confetti, Leo had a bold idea. He proposed to the children. Their eyes widened with excitement. Yes, they shouted, energy ricocheting among them. Over the next few weeks, they organized with gusto. The children distributed flyers, parents painted banners, and neighbors even fixed up the old park at the center of town. Leo's journey from anonymity to being a unifying force was well underway. On the day of the festival, the sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the town in a warm golden glow. Laughter echoed as families gathered, children ran, and the aroma of fresh food wafted through the air. Leo stood at the entrance, a wide smile on his face, heart pounding with excitement. "Welcome," he called, waving at the groups as they poured in. This was more than just a gathering. It was a testament to the strength they had inspired in one another over the past months. As the festivities unfolded, there were games, music, and countless stories. Leo took center stage, speaking to the crowd about the importance of community and connection. "Together, we're stronger," he declared, his voice ringing clear. They cheered, the atmosphere electric, each cheer lifting Leo higher. He felt like he could touch the sky. But as twilight descended, casting a warm blanket of orange and purple across the sky, the clouds began to roll back in. Just as the first drops of rain began to fall, a sudden gust of wind rattled the park. With a crack, a nearby tree began to sway dangerously, its roots exposed by weeks of rain. The crowd gasped, panic rippling through them. Then, just as fear began to spread, Leo sprang into action, just as he had done weeks prior. His hands trembled, but determination surged through him. He ran toward the tree, calling for the children to move away. He urged them, planting himself before the approaching threat, ready to protect. The tree creaked ominously, leaning further and further, branches straining against the storm. Wind howled, and rain began to pour down in torrents as the crowd stood frozen, stunned by the old man's resolve. They did not see an aged figure now, but a true embodiment of courage. As Leo steadied himself, his heart pounded against his chest. He shouted commands, rallying those around him to form a human chain, guiding people to safety away from the path of the falling tree. In those frantic moments, Leo's strength clashed with the storm, fierce and unyielding, ignoring the creeping fear trying to settle in. Just then, the tree crashed to the ground with a deafening roar, narrowly missing the crowd. Silence enveloped the park as the rain poured heavier, soaking everything in humid darkness. Many had screamed, hiding their faces, but as the dust settled, Leo was still standing, shaky but triumphant. He called, gesturing to the crowd he had just saved. There were cries of relief, overwhelmed faces glancing toward him, recognition settling in their hearts. They rushed forward, their gratitude spilling over. Someone shouted, and the crowd erupted in applause. In that moment, Leo realized that power comes not from youth or strength, but from the willingness to act when it matters most. He had reclaimed a piece of himself he thought was long lost. The rain continued to pour, washing away the remnants of fear, and what remained was resilience, a raw energy that flowed through those gathered. The festival may have been interrupted, but their spirits soared brighter than ever, testament to their shared strength and spirit. As the festival winded down, Leo looked around at the smiling faces, the way children felt safe in the presence of his steadfastness. Many came to embrace him, acknowledging him as a pillar of the community. They said, their voices full of warmth and admiration. In that comforting atmosphere, Leo felt a quiet realization settle within him. It wasn't just about being a hero on the outside. It was the impact he had made on so many lives, the courage they had shown in return, and the community they had built together. But as time rolled on, Leo began to feel the weight of age pressing down once more, and he grew aware that his body wasn't as strong as it once had been. One evening, as he retired, he felt tired beyond what he could explain. Days blurred into one another, and yet every encounter with his beloved community filled him with warmth. Then one day, he woke up and saw the colors outside his window, the vibrant hues of dawn spilling into his room. He felt an adjacent silence, a disturbing stillness in his heart. The strength that once surged through him was fading, but he was content. Not long after, a group of children gathered on his porch, excitedly chatting about the latest plans for the community center. They knocked on his door, bursting with energy. Leo, but today would be different. Leo stepped onto the porch, a gentle smile marking his lips, feeling the cool breeze on his face. "Kids, I need to tell you something important," he said, choosing his words carefully. Jason, the young boy he had saved, stepped forward, his brow furrowed in concern. "I won't be able to join you for a little while. My body isn't strong like it used to be," he said softly, watching as confusion filled their faces. "But I want you to remember everything we've shared." The strength, the stories, understanding dawned in their eyes, but sadness soon wrapped around them like a fog. Jason stepped up, fists clenched. "No, you have to come." The gentle resolve in Leo's voice met their anguish. "I know that. You're all so brave." With tears welling in their eyes, the children breathed deep, clinging to those cherished memories. Leo saw the light in them, knowing they would carry his story forward, that a piece of him would live on within each of them. Days turned into weeks, and as he sat by the window, he took comfort in watching the seasons change. The laughter of children bouncing off the walls of the community center, the bonds forged in unity. Then, on a quiet afternoon, surrounded by those he loved, Leo took his final breath. The town mourned, grief rising like a tide, but through the sorrow emerged a spirit that refused to be extinguished. Harvey, a close friend, stood before a crowd gathered at the newly built community center. Leo taught us that true strength lies not in one person, but in every single one of us. The townsfolk nodded, each heart heavy yet buoyed by the legacy he left behind. From that day on, they celebrated Herald Day in honor of Leo, a festival that reminded everyone of the bonds they had, the power they wielded when united. They shared stories, laughter, and love, knowing they carried his spirit forward, strengthened by the lessons he had ignited in their hearts. As generations passed, Leo transformed from just a retired mechanic into the heart of the community, an eternal flame that guided them through storms. The old man who had once been dismissed as helpless had shown them all their true power. In their unity, they had found strength in his memory, proving that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and sometimes the greatest power lies in the hearts of the humble. The storm raged outside, clouds dark and heavy, swirling with angry energy. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the small town of Willow Creek for brief moments before plunging it back into shadows. Most residents huddled inside, safely behind closed doors, watching the rain cascade down their windows like tears. But there, on the edge of town, stood a solitary figure, an old man named Samuel, undeterred by the fierce tempest. They whispered about him, sharing stories of his strange habits and the mysterious aura that surrounded him. He had lived in a decrepit, weather-beaten house for decades, often seen rummaging through his overgrown garden. Some said he was a coward, others thought he was just too stubborn to ask for help. They believed he had lost everything: his family, friends, and will to live. They had written him off as an old man who no longer mattered. But on this stormy afternoon, everything was about to change. Amid the howling wind and pounding rain, a terrified scream pierced the air. The town's children were playing outside, unbothered by the weather, when one little girl, Lily, lost her balance while climbing a slippery tree. She plummeted down, landing awkwardly on her ankle, and as she cried out, her friends stood frozen, helplessly calling for help. In that moment, Samuel's instincts kicked in. Without a second thought, he surged forward through the deluge, rain soaking through his tattered coat. The townsfolk watched in disbelief as the frail old man, hunched over and seemingly feeble, sprinted across the street, his face a mask of determination. He shouted, his voice breaking through the chaos. Panic turned to confusion among the spectators. Could he really reach her in time? As he reached the base of the tree, he swept up Lily's small, trembling body into his arms, shielding her with his own frame. He felt the panic that clutched her heart echoing within him. He called out, crouching low, as another flash of lightning lit up the world around them. The crowd gasped collectively, their assumptions about the old man shattering like glass. He wasn't helpless, he had acted when it mattered most. With a quick assessment of the situation, he carried Lily back toward the safety of their homes, his legs burning, every step a small victory against the downpour. As he reached the street, he could hear the rush of gratitude behind him, but he focused solely on the girl in his arms. Someone shouted, and he turned to see the anxious faces of the townspeople rushing toward him. He set Lily down gently, and she winced, tears streaming down her cheeks from fear and pain. It's all right, he murmured, kneeling beside her, holding her small hand firmly. For the first time, the old man noticed the townsfolk not just as spectators, but as a community, their eyes filled with concern, admiration shimmering just below the surface. He stood, the rain still pouring, but something had shifted inside him. I think she needs a doctor, a woman finally spoke, her voice shaking. The adult sprang into action, but Samuel felt a surge of strength wash over him, a power awakening from deep within. He lifted his chin, addressing the crowd. Within moments, he gathered the strength to kneel beside Lily, lifting her once more. You're all right, he told her, locking eyes with the terrified child. As he took careful, steady strides, the crowd began to part, their gasps morphing into murmurs of admiration. They had seen the old man in a new light, shedding their preconceived notions like the storm shedding leaves from the trees. Word spread quickly through the town about the heroic act. Samuel was no longer just a reclusive figure, he was a man who had acted against the odds. The following days felt different. The townsfolk began to approach him, sharing stories, asking questions. Children gathered on his porch, listening intently as he recounted tales from a time long past, tales of bravery, laughter, and life lessons learned. As new friendships blossomed in the wake of the storm, Samuel began to feel an unfamiliar warmth inside, a flicker of purpose guiding him through the days. Town had changed, and he felt like a part of it again. But one night, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with colors of dusk, a knock echoed through his door. He opened it to find an old friend, Martha, a childhood companion from years gone by, with a graying head of hair and a smile that could light up the darkest of rooms. Samuel, I heard about what you did for little Lily, she exclaimed, throwing her arms around him, the warmth of her embrace overpowering the chill of the autumn air. I just did what anyone would do, he muttered, but deep inside he felt the weight of her praise. No, Samuel, you showed courage when it mattered most. You showed all of us that there's more to life than hiding away. Her words bounced around inside him, igniting something he had buried long ago. "You've been standing on the sidelines for too long," she continued, her eyes sparkling with a mix of nostalgia and urgency. At first, he hesitated. Fear crept back in, whispering that he was too old, too out of shape. But then he remembered the way he had felt during the storm, the way the adrenaline had surged through him. I'd like to help," he finally replied, surprise creeping into his own voice. The next week saw Samuel getting involved in the town again. He joined planning meetings, offering insights and sharing wisdom. The once timid old man was now a visible force, his voice rising with enthusiasm, bringing ideas that breathed life into the plans. Hope hung thick in the air like the scent of pine after rain, filling the townspeople with a sense of renewal. The project they worked on together was a community center, a place where everyone could gather to share stories, meals, and laughter. It became a sanctuary for their collective spirit, a space for connection and heart. As construction progressed, Samuel threw himself into the work, spending mornings planning and afternoons building. He felt stronger every day, not in body alone, but in spirit too. The children that once revered him as a curious old man now looked up to him as a leader, teacher, and friend. However, as winter approached and the days shortened, so did Philip's energy. One icy morning, Samuel awoke feeling more fatigued than usual, his bones aching and a persistent cough rattling in his chest. He brushed it off, repeatedly whispering to himself that he was too busy to be sick. But as weeks turned into a grueling cycle of work and tiredness, he began to notice something far more disconcerting, a persistent heaviness in his heart that warned him something was wrong. Then one evening, as he sat on his porch watching frost slowly envelop the grass in a blanket of white, he heard faint laughter drift through the air. The townspeople were gathering, children running back and forth, and he felt a tugging pull within him to join them. He slowly rose, taking a few shaky steps, but the weight in his chest became unbearable. Suddenly, the world began to spin. He reached for the porch railing, heart racing, but the cold wood slipped through his fingers. In an instant, everything turned dark. Samuel collapsed there on the porch, the laughter around him fading into silence. And as he lay there, unconscious in the soft snow, the warmth of the community he had fought to rebuild began to evaporate, leaving an ominous question hanging in the air. Had he lost the fight before it had barely begun? Time seemed to stretch as snowflakes fell gently around him, the laughter of the town slowly fading into the distance. Would they come for him in time? Would they even notice he was gone? In those icy moments, as darkness enveloped him, Samuel held on to a single thought. They thought the old man was helpless, but perhaps in this moment, he could show them the ultimate power, one that could change everything once again.